Thank you very much. I'm so glad to see you all because this is an interactive session. And I want to make sure that you are all ready to be a part of this experience. So before we start, I want to introduce Joseph Williams as my accompanist and collaborator. He's going to be helping create this experience for you all. And every time we have something, we call it an experience, right? This is our experience together, and we're going to make music together. But particularly, I'm going to take you through some tools. I would like to share a piece with you first because it is Sunday. Bless the Lord. Come on, take me to church. Say amen. You know, one of the things that brought me to my work was feeling like I didn't belong. I was too jazzy for classical, too proper for gospel, too jazzy for R&B, too R&B for jazz. So I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? You know? And when I graduated, when I finished my first master's at IU, I started to go in this journey of understanding. I wanted to know, well, every time I'm in these cultural circles especially, I'm just not quite right. But no one could articulate why. Well, what am I doing? What am I doing that makes me sound like Sarah Vaughan singing Schubert? Quote. That was from the great Paul Keeskin, who was a dear fan, now mind you, of my jazz. He was like, "Ooh, Trineice." Bless his soul, right? But, you know, the issue and the challenge was always, well, okay, what is it that I'm doing? What am I doing? What am I supposed to be doing? And what am I doing specifically that makes you get the impression that it's in this genre or in this genre? So when I started to go into my graduate work at Teachers College, Columbia, I decided to study two focuses: vocal pedagogy and voice science, particularly as it related to contemporary commercial music. And also, I wanted to study gospel pedagogy. Actually, I wanted to study soul in general, like Black American music. But you know, when you narrow down your scope, and I'm a PK legacy of all preachers, so you know, it only fit, it only made sense. And gospel music and the study of its performance became the entry point for which I can access all of the different cultures of my memory, of my legacy. And through that work, I developed, the goal is to try to codify ways that we can start to talk about music expression and music development in a way that is still true to the cultural expression, right? So now we're not talking about, oh, let's diversify these sounds by trying to make it conform into the academic box. But rather, let's start trying to define what it is that we're hearing, what it is that we're perceiving. And part of what came out of that dissertation, and also was put in the So You Want to Sing gospel book from the Nat series that I authored, that also came straight from my dissertation, was this idea of how tools are used for musical expression. When you are the composer as an artist, which in folk-based music styles, the music is just your jump off, right? It's just your starting point. It's just the roadmap. And you're supposed to be in a position with the tools to be able to articulate what it is you want to say. However, that is not taught, right? That is not taught in academia. What's taught is the notes. What's taught is you're trying to build your instrument, but trying to build your instrument according to parameters that are associated with classical music, which do not always transfer. All right? So this is my exploration of Sing Your Soul. So here we go. You all ready? Yeah. All right. So, you know, I'm going to need you to talk back to me now, okay? I told you, I might not be a preacher, but let the Lord use you. So first thing I want to start off with is these general style parameters. And I'll stay by the term style here for this. So these individual characteristics, anytime we're looking of some sort of codification of pedagogy, we're looking at what are the parameters that we're training for. In this case, general style parameters and pedagogic considerations for folk-derived music styles. And I'm making it open to say anything that's coming from the people, right? And as a representation of the people that the music represents. So in this demographic of music, individuality is key. That means voice, the sound of your voice, the exploration of the sound of your personality. How can you ask a student to be themselves if they haven't taken the time to figure out what that is and what that sounds like, right? So in training and voice strategies, what we are really trying to do is come up with a strategy for conditioning your personality and the sounds in a manner that is sustainable. Does that make sense? That's fair? We're also looking at speech qualities. Because again, folk music sounds like the folks, right? It sounds like the folks that the music represents. So we're looking at that in terms of textures, timbres, dialects, emotional context, because everyone does not emote the same. And this is not based on ethnicity. This is based on your cultural experience, all right? We also recognize that melodic phrasing in these folk traditions aligns with subtle nuances of conversation. Well, I thought that was the case, right? We hear this quite often. And then when we put that together with music, we recognize that rhythmic phrasing is what is ultimately balancing this emotional intensity over a rhythm, over a groove, particularly in Black folk-based music. So when we're looking at these style pedagogy in perspective, one of the very important, in my opinion, parameters is that skill and virtuosity vary between styles and culture. Skill and what is defined as skill and virtuosity varies. Depends on what culture you're in. So you have to make sure that when you are training a skill set and you are acknowledging a virtuosic expression, that you are looking at it through the filters that are appropriate for the style and the culture that the music represents. Also, we recognize that in most folk music, if not all, I want to say all, but I'm going to say most as a scholar. We don't use all the time, right? Most music is learned through oral transmission and cultural immersion, right? We learn the music of our fathers and mothers and family, our situations, just by being in the space, right? And assimilating into that experience. So we have to think about that when we're in our teaching studios and we are teaching music that is representing a particular culture. If we are now going to teach them from a modality that is outside of how it would be taught in culture, and yet expect them to be authentic, or should I say culturally viable. We also want to recognize that the music that we're singing in folk is typically reflecting living cultures. Like the people are alive, the culture is active. We are not singing Mozart, who, God bless him, been gone. Just saying, he done been gone, him and his people. And as a result, right, we're reliving a culture that is, we're trying to figure out and we're trying to understand, how do we tap in with musicology? How do we tap in to the cultural expression in a viable manner for a past generation or a past culture? Well, when we're talking about folk-based music, I don't know about y'all, but my grandmother just turned 90 last week, and my great aunt is 101. So I got a lot of living. I can just ask, well, what happened? Right? I'm not guessing. So as a result, this is why we have to start doing the work. And even when we're creating new music, right? How is the person's culture? So these are those things that I want you to consider. And then lastly, individuality matters in folk music, right? It matters. You want someone to be them. You want to nourish who they are. You want to hear it from them. This is why we can sing the same songs and it sounds different. Because I want to know what you think. Because when I say, give me Jesus, my Jesus feels a whole lot different than your Jesus. Because I have my own set of experiences that come with a set of memory, right? It comes with a feeling in my body that may be different from your experiences. Not better, not worse, but different. So we're talking about, how do we bring this into the music? My definition of soul expression, and I say that outside of the context of soul music, but soul expression as it has been experienced through the legacies of African American experience, has been interpreted as the unapologetic, passionate communication of who you are, what you believe, and how you feel about it. Let me say that again. Unapologetic, passionate communication of who you are, what you believe, and how you feel about it. Oftentimes when we're talking about interpretation, we talk about word weighting. That's in the literature a lot. Word weighting, I love you. You are awesome. This is great. Well, in Black American music, words are not just weighted, they are loaded. Because of the history of not being able to speak in an articulate manner exactly what you believe, but you have to sometimes just look and swallow, right? So there's a legacy of communicating beyond words. There's a legacy of communicating with few words. So in the end, when we're talking about Black American music, period, and folk music, but Black American music specifically is functional. It does something. What are you here to do? What are you here to say? Why? So we're thinking about soul expression is really functional music in or with purpose. The purpose of what? Purpose of healing, purpose of affecting your audience in a way that is going to move them to do something or feel something. And you simply apply that to all of our music styles. That's what happens when we bring our influences into different modalities. Why is it that we have the shared experience? This map on your right is a census map of 1900. And it's basically stating, according to this 1900 census map, the colored dots that you see is the population of Africans in the United States, or in the States at the time, right? So if slavery ends 63, right? And then, or 65, I always put that in because when I'm giving these lectures, I think folks don't recognize certain aspects that include, I found out that New Jersey didn't actually free their slaves, the remaining slaves that were there after the abolition until like 67. So, yes, because there was a law apparently that when they abolished slavery, it was only if you were born after a certain year. So people that were still living were still slaves. But anyways, I digress. Anywho, so between the 1870 and 1910s, nearly every southern state took away the rights with all of the legislation, poll tax, grandfather clause. In this space, I hope that we know this history, so I won't dwell, but before 1900, 90% of Black Americans lived in the South, and 4/5 lived in the rural South. Then we get these great migration waves, the first and the second. And I always bring this up because, I teach mainly in the jazz and popular music circles. So when they're talking about the history of blues, or they're talking about the history of jazz and not understanding why the sound of the Black experience is carried through these sounds, they don't understand the history, they don't understand the migrations, and understand that the legacy is coming from the shared experience. So musically, something that I don't think is often talked about is why there is so much vocal music. I've read that slaves that could sing were worth more because of the productivity that came along with singing and working. So if you had a strong voice, just like if you had strong muscles, if you had a strong voice, that was an asset. So we have these different overarching styles, right? You have your work songs, leader in a group, maintains a definitive, it's a function, right? The function is to spread out the day, 10 days worth of labor, so everybody's not getting exhausted. And they don't say this, but as a voice teacher, I can't help but to think about how pacing and breathing, hey, there's motion in that I would imagine helps longevity. But I'm just putting myself into it at this point. I didn't read that. Okay. It's also used to maintain and coordinate rhythms, particularly for pacing effort, right? The other thing is ring shouts, the religious worship, song, and dance, continuous polyrhythmic patterns. In another, I have a whole separate lecture where I actually go through these and link them to today's music. But just for the context, right, just to give you some cultural context, I'm adding these things. Field hollers is the one I really want to focus on today. Sung alone in solidarity, usually no established pulse, not necessarily even one song. Could be a stream of consciousness. Folk spirituals and sorrow songs, we're just talking about religious songs with cultural functions, right? So it's either to celebrate or to talk, discuss. These are things that we've discussed all this weekend. Now, the reason why I want to focus on field hollers for this particular talk is because many of the characteristics that we use in vocal music, obviously come from every single aspect, but when you're nourishing your own self, when you're nourishing your own musical expression, then it's going to be closer to a field holler in terms of its function. So I'm going to show you this clip. This is the only clip. I tried to take every audio stuff out of the document, but I just wanted to show you this short clip. So I'm normally playing this clip for my teacher training program, and the first thing I ask is, did you care about his breath support? Was his resident strategy according to your liking? Did it matter? Right? Why? Because it wasn't the point. Because it wasn't the point. Right? So when we think about music being functional in this context, and we think about the idea, let me get back to the microphone, of music being an expression of self, an expression for the moment, an expression of healing. There are certain parameters, not to say that they're not important, but they are not the priority. Right? So an author, I've received this from an author long time ago in my undergraduate studies, and I still can't. I've been looking to figure out where I got this quote from. Thank you. And this quote says, the difference between country music, and this is even at the level of race records, right, of country music and blues music, is that blues music uses text to tell emotion. Okay? Well, I woke up this morning and I put on my red boots and I came out of my car, I went to my yellow car and rolled up to the street to get me a loaf of bread. Right? They're going to spell it out, stanza by stanza. what happened. Blues, on the other hand, uses emotion to communicate. So that same song will go, oh, I'm so tired. I ain't even got to my red shoes yet, or my yellow shoes. I ain't even got there yet. Because it's not about the shoes, it's about how tired I am and how I feel about it. Does that make sense? So, using that, we're going to go into our workshop. Tools, I'll say sometimes tools for improvisation, tools for interpretation, tools for soul expression. I use this title interchangeably because some titles scare people. You say improvisation, they're like, oh my gosh. You know, when you're really just telling a story. All right? So this is particularly, we're going to use these 5 elements. A lot of times, like I said, we know what it is that we want to hear, but sometimes don't have the words to say, well, did we try this? Did we try to bring this element to the story? And those 5 elements are vocal nuances, rhythm and feel, melodic improvisation, textual improvisation, and dynamics, and that's not only in terms of volume, but in terms of emotional intensity. So here's the workshop. So I just found that online. So we are going to sing together. Yes, together. I told you this was a mutual event. I told you we were going to have church. This is communal, right? This is part of the functional behavior. We do this together. All right. So this little light of mine. Now here is the trick. I need you to sing it exactly like it's written. I don't care how you know it. I need you to just sing what's there. Because we're going to add on these different characters. That makes sense? Characteristics. But in order for you to really understand, you got to sing it exactly like it's written. Okay? All right, Joe. Come on, that's right. Keep it straight now. Don't put no soul in it. Here we go. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Wonderful. All right. So now, in the vocal qualities and nuance category, what kinds of things can you add? What kinds of things can you change? What kinds of things are a part of who you are? So there's vocal qualities, tones, and timbres. In my work, vocal registration and qualities moves from a place of you do this on these notes to you do this because this is what that sounds like. Because, first of all, I have a microphone in my work, so there's a lot of things that I can get by with that you might not be able to get by with, okay? And this has a different sound, right? I'm in head voice and I'm in a breathy sound. That has a different, like, oh my gosh, come here. But guess what? This has a different sound too. Oh my gosh, come here. What you say? Right? Right? Qualities have a different, they just feel different. They have different functions. So breathy, raspy, gravel, brassy, whiny, belt, whatever description you can think about that is a part of somebody's personality. Even your own. Because when you're tired, you sound different. When you're excited, you sound different. I mean, I'm a very animated person. I mean, y'all know me, so I'm always animated, right? So I have different levels to what I do, what my sound, just naturally, which is ironically why it was so hard for me to find a quote-unquote mix. I mean, and somebody could have just said, you know, when you be like, what? Girl, this is crazy. And you mean I've been doing it all my life? And y'all trying to find some random something as if it's a definitive thing? But anyways, I digress. So vocal registrations, again, we have the heavy, light, chest, mix, fry, whistle, like everything. Woo, yes, Lord. Okay. Vocal nuances. I got the 5-minute mark. Okay, vocal nuances. Vibrato, squalls, whooping, slurs, humming, word distortion. These are things that you can use, and I'm going to move a little bit faster. We're not going to sing yet. We were supposed to sing, and my bad. So we're going to move faster. Rhythm. 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 Rhythm is a dance. Rhythm is your heartbeat against time, which, depending on your context, beats at different times, right? Beats at different rates. Rhythm is movement. It's the rhythm of the hips. Feel is the sensation captured in the experience of the atmosphere, right? What does it feel like? That's going to vary my interpretation. It depends on what I feel like in the context, all right? And then recognizing that most folk meters always are in some sort of triple meter. Why? Because number one, we're trying to capture this aesthetic in a Western European classical notation that it's not always sufficient. And frankly, what you see those lines is because the precision that occurs in music derived from, say, marching music. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The precision is much more angular, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And black folk music and black American music is more circular. Take your hand and make a circle. Just making a circle, there's the weight at the bottom of your hand that says, hey, this is the beat, come on. Right? So if we were going to sing This Little Light of Mine, let's go add these two things in it. 1, 2, 3. This little light of mine. Rhythmically altering the melody of the section by using some form of syncopation. Elongation or shortening of the melodic phrase. It basically means you're going to come in before or come in after what's written. Syncopation means you're going to use various rhythmic patterns over, and this is going to be easier to see, you're going to use various rhythmic patterns over what's existing. But let's start with we're going to elongating, so we're going to make it easy by just maybe coming in a half a beat early. This little light of mine. The second phrase, I want you to shorten it, which means you're going to come in after the beat. Boom. I'm going to let it shine. Make sense? We're going to do the same thing with that one. The second line, you're going to start this little light of mine. So we're going to alternate. And then we're going to come on the beat in the last 4 bars. That make sense? Let's get our circle. 2, 3. This little light of mine. Short. I'm gonna let it shine. Long. This little light of mine. Now make it short. I'm gonna let it shine. Make it long. This little light of mine. Make it short. I'm gonna let it, put it on time. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Now, melodic improvisation is the alteration of the melody, simple or major complexions. So the simple or minor alterations are just adding an extra note. This little light of mine, you're just adding a little bit of note. This little light of mine, right? Adding one little note over thing. Your major or complex alterations when you're just completely rewriting the melody. I'm gonna let it shine. Like you're doing all kinds of different things. Sometimes people do a little bit too much. But that's because they're applying the tools without context, okay? So we have our melodic ornamentations that include repeated notes. Right? That's a repeated note. Tails, note bending, slides, slurs, all of these things that we use. Melodic improvisation, which varies depending upon the background or, again, the cultural context and conversation. That could be one syllable. You hear Stevie Wonder use that quite a bit, right? And in the jazz, you'll have multiple, right? It's going to be much more percussive. It has its own set of parameters. And the blues is just going to be, right? Might be just humming. So we would add that, blah, blah, blah. Text, last thing. Text. Textual interpolation means you're inserting a word that was not in the composition, okay? Don't you know that I'm gonna let it shine, right? You're adding a word. Exactly, right? Textual phrasing is when you're grouping words together within a phrase to emphasize a specific word, right? Some people call it word weighting, but again, in the music, it's loaded, right? Because they're like, I'm nobody else but me. I'm gonna let it shine. It's loaded. Testimony. Adding a short or personal story, spoken or song, which that you share with the audience to bring it. Like, you don't know my experience. You know, I might feel with this song, right? But this song, I know everybody has felt in a place where you're just not good enough. But you know what? I'm declaring today that this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, right? And then we have ad-libbing. A lot of people are like, I can't ad-lib. Again, your story is not together. Because if you're committed, you're just continuing the conversation. How are you going to let it shine? Why are you going to let it shine? Then the words come, just tell me, and we're going to set it to music. All right? So I know I'm out of time. Do we have time to sing it one more time? One more time. Okay, so now I want you all, this is the last one. It's really time up. Thank you, Daryl. But I want us all to sing it, and I want you to, in your own way, add all of the elements. Okay? All of the elements together. All right? 1, 2. You know what to do. This little light of mine. Oh, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. Let me tell you, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Here we go. Let it shine. Let it shine. Hey. Thank you very much, and thank you, Daryl Taylor and African American Art Song Alliance for having me. Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for participating.